As Julius Caesar once famously noted, most of the internet quotes are fake. But it turns out that fake quotes have been around much longer than the internet. Great thinkers of antiquity are up there with Gandhi and Lincoln in the ranks of the most prolific supposed authors of those wise and inspirational one-liners. The ancient status lends a lot of authority to the words, and very few people would bother checking if the historical figure in question had ever actually said them. And while most of these fakes are easily identifiable by the mismatching style, there are few that have become so popular, it's almost like they managed to retroactively unfake themselves. Only the best of the best fake quotes achieve this status. So in this video, I am giving you the made-up sayings of 5 ancient authors, which are so good that if the ancients would have heard them, they'd probably not mind being associated with them at all. While today his popularity is overshadowed by the likes of Caesar, Augustus and Marcus Aurelius, during the Enlightenment era, Cicero was everyone's favorite Roman. Because of this, he is attributed with many popular quotes from the Roman times. The bread and circuses line is sometimes credited to him, even though it was written by Juvenal some 150 years after Cicero's death. The ultimate source of great fake Cicero quotes is the novel called A Pillar of Iron by Taylor Caldwell. Here we have 2 particularly great passages. The first one expresses a sentiment that is shared by anyone who has ever had to deal with bureaucracy. A bureaucrat is the most despicable of men, though he is needed as vultures are needed. But one hardly admires vultures, whom bureaucrats so strangely resemble. I have yet to meet a bureaucrat who was not petty, dull, almost witless, crafty or stupid, an oppressor or a thief, a holder of little authority in which he delights as a boy delights in possessing a vicious dog. Who can trust such creatures? It is a very relatable paragraph, but my pick for the greatest fake Cicero quote would be another one from the same book. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly. But the traitor moves amongst those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. I am not going to read it whole, because it is rather long, but a quick internet search would give many images with both the short and the long version. This passage is loosely based on Cicero's second Catilinarian narration. But why are we speaking so long about one enemy, and about that enemy who now avows that he is one, and whom I now do not fear? Because, as I have always wished, a wall is between us, and are saying nothing about those who dissemble, who remain at Rome, who are among us. The version from the book got a popularity boost after a Florida Supreme Court Justice Millard Caldwell used it in his speech. I thought that he and the book author were somehow related, but couldn't find anything to confirm it. However, both of them were prominent American conservatives in the 60s. Taylor Caldwell was a member of the John Birch Society and wrote for a conservative journal, American Opinion. Judge Millard Caldwell shared her political views, which should be apparent from his speech. In it, he uses the passage from A Pillar of Iron to warn against the dangers of a communist takeover of America. Whatever the politics of the time were, it is a very powerful paragraph, and its popularity is a testament to how good this fictional Cicero is at English rhetoric. Almost as good as the real one was at Latin. Socrates, Plato and Aristotle are all frontrunners in the competition for the largest amount of fake quotes attributed to a single person. However, not to extend this list indefinitely, I decided to pick a single one from all 3 of the great Greek classics. This one is supposed to come from the father of philosophy himself. By all means, marry. If you get a good wife, you'll become happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. Socrates had famously written nothing, so most of his real quotes come to us through the writings of Plato and Xenophon. This one here is loosely based on Socrates' character and Xenophon's Symposion. One of the speakers in the book asks the philosopher why he married Xanthippe, who, according to the philosopher's own words, is the hardest woman to get along with that have ever lived or ever will live. Socrates, in response, compares himself to an apprentice horseman who wishes to perfect his skill. I observe that people wishing to become expert horsemen do not acquire the most docile horses, but rather those that are highly spirited, believing that if they can manage this kind, they will easily handle any other. My course is similar. Mankind at large is what I wish to deal and associate with, and so I have got her, well assured that if I can endure her, I shall have no difficulty in my relations with all the rest of mankind. The "by all means marry" version first appears in the 1949 book Why Are You Single? By Hilda Holland. Miss Holland, whomever was the originator of this quote, took a lot of artistic liberties with the source material. However, the quote is quite snappy and reflects Socrates' wit very well, so I think we should keep it. There are two main sources of fake Marcus Aurelius quotes: Instagram Stoicism accounts and the movie Gladiator. Running an Instagram Stoicism account must be a very tough job. Meditations is just a single book, and it's not even a big one. There are only so many sentences you can make into a one-liner and put next to a picture of a wrong emperor for today's life-changing Stoic quote. Luckily, most of your subscribers have an understanding of Stoicism based entirely on inspirational quotes, so they aren't going to know the difference between a real sentence from Marcus Aurelius and the Sigma male one-liner from the Peaky Blinders guy. Stoicism is a very nuanced philosophy, so inevitably when its tenets are being packaged for the mass consumer market, they lose most of their original meaning. Some quotes of the Stoics get modern interpretations that are way off the original point. Others manage to keep the general meaning, but are adapted to fit a more modern worldview. One of the most prominent of these pop Stoicism quotes falls into that second category. Live a good life. If there are gods and they are just, then they will not care how devout you have been, but will welcome you based on the virtues you have lived by. If there are gods but unjust, then you should not want to worship them. If there are no gods, then you will be gone, but will have lived a noble life that will live on in the memories of your loved ones. And here's what the original one says. Since it is possible that you may depart from life at this very moment, regulate every act and thought accordingly. But to go away from among men, if there are gods, is not a thing to be afraid of, for the gods will not involve you in evil. But if indeed they do not exist, or if they have no concern about human affairs, what is it to me to live in a universe devoid of gods or devoid of providence? But in truth they do exist, and they do care for human things, and they have put all the means in man's power to enable him not to fall into real evils. The adaptation gives the quote some kind of agnostic vibe, which was very rare in classical thought. But at least the message of the paragraph is more or less preserved. Out of the Instagram Stoicism quotes, it's probably one of the best. However, the very best fake Marcus Aurelius quote comes from the second main source, the movie Gladiator. There is this great scene near the end of the film, where Commodus and Maximus talk in the dungeon before they ascend into the arena. I knew a man who once said, "Death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back," says Maximus. I wonder, did your friend smile at his own death? You must know. He was your father. Commodus's father is, of course, Marcus Aurelius. This fake quote is the closest to a real one out of the whole list. There is a passage in Meditations that says, "Accept death in a cheerful spirit, as nothing but the dissolution of the elements, from which every living thing is composed." I assume the line from the film was based on it, but it was made much more poetic to fit the romantic tone of the movie. Out of all the adapted quotes from Marcus Aurelius, this one does the best job of being memorable, while keeping the original meaning intact. For this section I would also be giving you two quotes instead of one. Both of them are attributed to Thucydides, and both sound like something he might have said. The first one says, "Peace is only an armistice in an endless war." Here it is in the 2017 movie Wonder Woman.
Peace is only an armistice in an endless war.
Thucydides.
Ah, you know your ancient Greeks.
Thucydides is primarily known as the author of the history of the Peloponnesian War. He has been called the father of political realism, so this attribution is not inconceivable. The word armistice gives it away as modern, but it could have easily been a paraphrasal. However, that's not the case. Nothing close to this sentence can be found in his writings. A quick internet search confirms that this saying has been attributed to Thucydides before Wonder Woman, and the earliest instance of that is from 1988, when it was painted on the walls of the West Point Museum. There are two very similar quotes. One is by Ferdinand Foch about the Treaty of Versailles, and the other is by Napoleon about the Peace of Amiens. Winston Churchill attributed this famous quote about the Versailles Treaty to Foch. "This is not peace, it is an armistice for 20 years. Napoleon's remark from 1802 says, "In the present state of affairs, every peace treaty means no more than a brief armistice, and I believe that my destiny will be to fight almost continuously." There is also a similar passage from Plato's Laws about how peace is just a name, and in reality every state is engaged perpetually in an informal war with every other state. So overall it is a snappy quote with some historical basis, but not actually something you can find in the writings of Thucydides. Another quote attributed to the Greek historian is the one about scholars and warriors. "A nation that makes a great distinction between its scholars and its warriors will have its laws made by cowards and its wars fought by fools." This one could have easily been from Thucydides as well, given how he was both a scholar and a soldier, but it turns out that this is also a misattribution. The origin of this one is easier to determine. It appears to be a paraphrase of a quote from the biography of the British Major General Charles George Gordon. "The nation that will insist upon drawing a broad line of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find its fighting done by fools and its thinking by cowards." Finally, there is another famous quote, allegedly recorded by Thucydides, but attributed to his contemporary, Pericles. "Just because you do not take an interest in politics, doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you." This one is a cooler version of an actual statement from Pericles' funeral oration. "We do not say that a man who takes no interest in politics is a man who minds his own business. We say that he has no business here at all." It appears in the history of the Peloponnesian War. The meaning here is a little different, but I think it is close enough to be considered a real quote. The history of the Peloponnesian War has a whole array of authentic sayings which reflect a realistic view of war and politics. One such example is, "The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must." The lines that I've listed above do not appear in the book, but would have certainly fit right in.
And Alexander wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer. Hans Gruber, Die Hard.
That's actually a perfect attribution. Thank you, Alec Baldwin. This quote is the one that got me the idea for the video. It always struck me as a strange one. Surely Alexander knew about other places he could conquer. He was planning an Arabian expedition right before he died. The quote is of course fake, but somehow it became a Hollywood cliché to say this fancy line when a man is left unsatisfied after achieving his goals. The reason for its prominence is that the screenwriters don't read classical texts, but they watch a lot of other Hollywood movies. As Alec Baldwin informed us, the "No More Worlds to Conquer" line owes its popularity to the 1988 action film Die Hard, starring Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman. The movie's antagonist, Hans Gruber, played by Rickman, says this line upon reaching the goal of his master plan.
"And when Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept, for there were no more worlds to conquer." Benefits of a classical education.
The real benefit of classical education, apparently, is the ability to make up fake ancient quotes without being called out. It certainly sounds cool, so there is no wonder other screenwriters decided to borrow it, sometimes mixing up Alexander with Caesar, which makes even less sense to anyone familiar with either man's career.
Caesar wept for there were no more worlds to conquer. Shane? Shame.
But this mix-up from the 2015 The Big Short gives us a hint on the origin of this so-called quote. There is a classical source that deals with the lives of both Alexander and Caesar, and that is, of course, Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans. This is a very famous book in which Plutarch recounts the lives of famous figures from Greek and Roman history in pairs, highlighting the similarities of their careers. Alexander naturally gets paired up with Caesar. In Alexander's part, there is a passage about the young prince's attitude to the conquests of his father when he was still a boy. For when they brought him news that his father had taken some famous city or had won some great battle, he was nothing glad to hear it, but would say to his playfellows, "Sirs, my father will have all. I shall have nothing left for me to conquer with you that shall be aught worth." In Caesar's part, there is a paragraph about him having a midlife crisis after reading about the achievements of Alexander. In like manner, we are told that in Spain, when he was at leisure and was reading the history of Alexander, he was lost in thought for a long time, and then burst into tears. His friends were astonished and asked the reason for his tears. "Do you not think," said he, "it is a matter for sorrow that while Alexander at my age was already king of so many peoples, I have as yet achieved no brilliant success?" In addition, there is a passage from another Plutarch's book, Moralia. Alexander, when he heard Anaxarchus argue that there were infinite worlds, is said to have wept. And when his friends asked him what had happened, he said, "Is it not to be wept for, since they say there are infinite worlds, and I am not yet a lord of one?" You can see that the language for the movie line is taken from this last one, and the theme of crying about not conquering stuff is present in all three, but the sentiment expressed is entirely different. The Hans Gruber line is supposed to be about achieving so much that there is nothing more to achieve, while Plutarch's Alexander weeps about his achievements being too insignificant in comparison to the grandeur of the universe. Caesar is also off the mark, since he's just depressed to not have done as much as Alexander. The only one that is kind of similar is the one about Alexander as a child, but that's still just a boy being anxious about not having enough to achieve when he grows up, and not the same as a man at the end of his path. The worlds to conquer language also appears in an early account by Valerius Maximus. So somehow between the 1st and the 20th century, these four passages got garbled up together to produce a quote with an entirely different meaning. With some help from the internet, I've established a quotation chain that shows how this happened. The earliest English translation of Plutarch's Moralia that I could find is from 1527 by Sir Thomas Wyatt. The "more worlds" line with the changed meaning first appears in a panegyric to my Lord Protector by Edmund Waller in 1655. In a play from 1700s called The Way of the World by William Congreve, one of the characters says, "Nothing remains when that day comes, but to sit down and weep like Alexander when he wanted other worlds to conquer." By 1905, it was made into an apocryphal tale, which was added to James Baldwin's anthology 30 More Famous Stories Retold. It then made its way onto the TV screen in 1963 in the episode of The Twilight Zone named Of Late I Think of Cliffordsville.
He cried because he had no more worlds to conquer.
What?
It was Alexander the Great. He cried because he had no more worlds to conquer.
And that is probably where the writers of Die Hard had got it from. Of course, Die Hard was a very successful movie, so there's no getting rid of it now. It doesn't really matter if we blame these guys who wrote the script to Die Hard, the English poets who wanted to suck up to Cromwell, or just everyone involved. The quote is so fancy and cool sounding that it is here to stay, regardless of being fake. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any other great fake quotes from classical antiquity, be sure to put them in the comments. And in the immortal words of Diogenes, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.